Welcome back to my spare bedroom as we learn more about economics in our distance learning environment. Second, I'd like to welcome you to the month of May, the last 3 weeks of your high school educational experience. Of course, it's not like we had planned to spend it, but it is May, and before you know it, you'll be a high school graduate. I'd like to say thank you to all of you that came out to the parade the other day. It made me feel really good. It was one of the best moments I've ever had at the school, to see all your faces and to see people so happy and celebrating. I look forward to the graduation activities that we're going to have in whatever method those might be. To those of you that were unable to attend the parade, I miss you and hope that we'll see each other again real soon. This week's lessons, beginning with chapter 14 today and then next week with chapter 15, we're going to be looking at solutions to our economic problems. In chapters 12 and 13, we looked at statistics that measure how the economy was doing. We looked at the unemployment rate, we looked at the inflation rate, we looked at GDP and whether the economy is growing or is in a recession like we currently are. In chapters 14 and 15, we're going to look at solutions. What can be done by the government? What can be done by this group called the Federal Reserve, which is what we're going to learn about in this chapter. What can be done to solve problems like a recession or an inflation problem? But before we get into the Fed and in the next chapter, we learn about what the government can do. It's important that we learn how banks operate. Banks have a very important role in our economic system. Okay? Banks are businesses, and all businesses sell something. Okay? A car dealership sells cars, a barber shop sells haircuts, a hamburger stand sells hamburgers, but what does a bank sell? Well, banks sell money. Okay? And just like a car dealership has to buy the car from the manufacturer and then turns around and sells it to a customer, banks have to buy their money. And banks buy their money in the form of deposits. You and I deposit our money in the bank for safekeeping. But what do the banks give us in return for keeping our money with them? Well, they pay us. Currently, you might earn 1% on your deposits. Most banks don't pay that. Okay? But you might earn, say, 1% on your money. The banks are, in essence, buying that money from us for 1% a year. What do they do with that money? Well, they turn around and they sell it. Okay? They sell it in the form of a loan. You might loan or put the money in the bank, they pay you 1% for it. Then you turn around and you buy the money back from them when you get a loan to buy a house or a car or a college education. Okay? So banks are buying it at a low price, say 1% a year, and they're selling it to us at a higher price. Much like the car dealership buys the car from the manufacturer for, say, $20,000 and then turns around and sells it to us for $25,000. Banks make money by selling money. Okay? Very difficult for a bank to go bankrupt as long as they're selling the money for more than what they're paying for it. Unless the people that are borrowing that money don't pay it back. And this is exactly what happened during the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, a lot of people lost their jobs, okay? And so they were unable to pay back their home loans and to pay back their farm loans and so forth. So the banks were paying out 1%, but they weren't getting the 5% back because people were defaulting or not paying back on their loans. And as a result, a lot of the banks started to go bankrupt. People had put their money in, but then those banks had loaned it out and were not getting it paid back. And so the banks were going bankrupt. People began to panic and run to the banks and say, hey, give me my money before the bank could go bankrupt. Well, this is catastrophic for the economy, as we're going to learn the importance of people leaving money in the banks. Okay? So in 1933, at the very heart of the Great Depression, the federal government created the FDIC, The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is a government agency that insures your bank deposits. So the government said to the depositors, to the people that had money in the banks, look, you don't have to panic. If the bank goes bankrupt, the government guarantees that you'll get your money back. Okay? The original FDIC limit was $2,500. So if the bank went bankrupt, they guaranteed that everybody would get at least $2,500 back from whatever they had on deposit. And that might not seem like a lot of money, but this is 1933, okay? And $2,500 would buy a house. And so that was a lot of money. Of course, over time, the FDIC insurance limits have been raised. Okay? The book says that the FDIC insurance limit is $100,000. Well, the book is old and out of date. During the Great Recession, the FDIC limit was raised to $250,000 per depositor. Okay? And that's what it currently is today. So if you have $250,000 or less in the bank and the bank goes bankrupt because of the pandemic or any other reason, do you have to worry about losing your money? No. The FDIC, the government agency, insures your deposits up to $250,000. And that's per depositor. So if you have a joint account, like Mrs. Ward and I have a joint account, we have up to $500,000, $250,000 each. We have up to $500,000 in insurance coverage if our bank were to go bankrupt. Now, we don't have $500,000, so we don't have to worry. Okay? Now, if you had more than that, if you had, let's say, a single account, and you had more than $250,000, that's the maximum that you would get. If you did have more than that kind of money, the best thing to do would be to spread it out amongst different banks. Put $250,000 at Bank of America, $250,000 at Chase, $250,000 at Wells Fargo. And so even if all three of them went bankrupt, you could only you get all $250,000 from each bank. The FDIC was established to calm people from taking money out of the banks. And why is it important that money is put into the banks? Well, that's the last part of this section, because when money is put into the banks, it's said to expand or grow. We learned that a bank is going to make loans. Well, where do they get the money that they make loans from? You and I might put our money in there and they're going to pay us, and then they turn around and they loan that money out to Mr. De Monteverde who wants to buy a new car. Okay? So what happens if you deposit $100 into the bank? Okay? You get money for graduation or whatever the case might be, and you deposit $100 into the bank. The bank wants to loan that money out. Are they allowed to loan out all of it? No. We use what's called the fractional reserve system. And the banks are required to keep a certain percentage called the reserve requirement. The reserve requirement is the percentage that the bank must hold on to. And it varies, but we're going to use, like the book does, 20%. So every time a deposit is made into the bank has to hold on to 20%. Well, 20% of 100 would be, of course, $20. They have to hold on to that money. They have to leave it in their bank's vault. They have to leave it on account with the Fed, which is we're going to learn about in the next section. But they have to hold on to that $20. The other $80, what we call excess reserves, are now available to be loaned out. Okay? So $100 is deposited, $20 is taken out, and now the bank can loan out $80. Okay? So let's say they loan that $80 out to me. Okay? So I want to borrow that $80. Let's call me Mr. Ward. Okay? And I borrow that $80. They're going to give me a check. I'm going to now take that $80, and what am I going to do with it? Well, I'm going to now take that and I'm going to deposit it into my bank. Okay. What is my bank going to do with it? Well, by law, they're required to keep 20% in reserve. So 20% of 80 is $16. So now my bank is going to hold on to $16, and they now have $64 left that they can do what? They can loan out. Okay? Say Mr. D decides to borrow that $64 to buy his wife an anniversary gift or something. So he borrows that $64. What's going to happen? He's going to put that $64 in the bank. He's going to deposit it. And the whole process is going to keep going. Another 20%, in this case $12.80, is going to be taken out in reserve. Okay? That leaves $51.20 to be loaned out and so forth. And you can see how we could just keep doing this. Every time a deposit is made, the bank is going to take some out, and then they get to loan out the rest. Take some out, loan the rest. Okay? Well, how much was originally deposited? Well, original deposit was $100. So how much do you get to spend? Well, you put $100 into the bank, so you get to spend $100. I put $80 in, so I get to spend $80. Mr. D put in $64. So how much money can be spent so far? Well, if you add them all up, that's $244. Even though only $100 was originally deposited, the money supply is said to expand out to $244. That's why it's so important that money is left in the banks, because when money is deposited into the banks, it can be loaned out and then it can expand. And you might be thinking, well, Mr. Ward, how does that happen? How does money expand? Well, when you think of money, most of you are thinking about good old American cash money. But is that what most of the money looks like in the United States? No. Some of it does look like this, paper money with, green ink and dead presidents' pictures on it. But most of the money in the United States is simply numbers in a computer system. For example, I got paid on Friday, May the 1st. First day of the month, I get paid. Okay? So how did I get paid? Well, they simply moved some numbers and put them into my account. Okay? If I took my paycheck, I happen to have direct deposit. But if I took my paycheck into the bank, it would just be a slip of paper, and then they would magically put more numbers in my account. And now I can start spending those dollars. Okay? But they don't put a bunch of these in the bank with my name on them. They don't say, this is Mr. Ward's money. That's just numbers in a computer. And then when you get a loan or I get a loan, they don't give it to us in the form of cash money. They give it to us in the form of a check, or they just simply transfer it electronically. And because of all that electronic transferring of money, the money supply is able to expand. Even though $100, Grandma gave you $100 for your graduation gift, you deposit it into your bank, and now all of a sudden they can start loaning it out, and then I can borrow it and loan and so forth. The money supply is said to expand. And that's why it's so critical that money is put into the banks. And there's a formula in the book, and it goes like this. The money supply will continue to expand all the way out using this formula. And we're going to need this formula in this section, but also in the next section. In order to figure out how far the money supply can expand, take the deposits. In this case, you deposited $100 and you divide it by the reserve requirement. Our reserve requirement was 20%, but in order to write 20%, we write it as a decimal, 0.20. Well, $100 divided by 0.20 is going to grow all the way out to $500. Okay? And I know some of you are questioning the math, so put it into your calculator, you'll see that I'm right. $100 divided by 0.20 is 500. Excuse me. And so that's why it's so important that money is put into the banks. Because when money is put into the bank, when it's deposited and stays on deposit, that $100 can expand all the way out to $500. Okay? So banks play a very important role in our economy because they get to help determine the money supply. And as we get into section 3 in the next video, you're going to see how important the money supply is to influencing economic activity. Whether the economy is going to be growing or slowing down can all be influenced significantly by the amount of money that's in circulation, or what we call the money supply. Okay? So in section 2 here of chapter 14, we learned about banks. Banks are businesses, and businesses sell something. The banks rather, sell money. They buy the money from us when we deposit it there. They pay us for the money. They give us 1% a year in interest, or 2%, or 0.5%. But they're buying that money, and then they turn around and sell it in the form of loans. Okay? And you don't have to worry about if your bank goes bankrupt because of the FDIC insurance. Okay? And remember, when the money is deposited, it's going to be loaned out, and then that's going to help the money supply expand. Okay? So banks are supervised by a group called the Federal Reserve System, or the Fed. And that's what we're going to learn more about in section 3.